Welcome back to Block TV. The coronavirus, a disease that has crossed borders and spread wide-scale panic across the world, infecting nearly 100,000 people and claiming the lives of more than 3,000, may be without a cure so far, but that does not mean there are no ways to battle it and some of its negative consequences. Enter blockchain, a revolutionary technology that has many attributes that can help find solutions to the disease's worst manifestations. Now, to hear all about them, ponder and theorize, it's important to note we're theorizing. We are joined in studio by a man who is determined to bring the potential of the technology to the fore. Dr. Inon Schenker, he's a global public health expert, former World Health Organization technical officer, and of course also via Zoom from Los Angeles by Danny Brown-Wolf, head of partnership and strategy at Orbs. Hello to the both of you and great to have you here.
Thank you.
Danny, I want to start actually with you a little bit because you are in the United States and the virus has crossed over obviously to the United States the way it did to the rest of the world. That was expected. I get a sense that the disinformation when it comes to the virus is spreading faster than the disease itself. Is the case the same in the United States?
Well, there are a few ways to handle disinformation. I mean, I think there's less of a panic here, but it might not be justified. The Twitter feed basically says that they just aren't being tested. And there's always a question when the independent labs actually test it, who do they report to? And then is it a political decision when it comes out, or is it a medical decision? And blockchain here would be interesting if the labs themselves could actually put in the data permissionlessly, not going through any political third party that might decide to use the facts one way or another. Another aspect of the disinformation was there was just too much user-generated content, especially in places, not in the United States, but in places like Wuhan, where journalists were not allowed. So there's always a question about authenticating the information, authenticating the videos that they were really taken at that place in time, which is something that blockchain is a great use case for. But preventing the spread of fake news and the panic is blockchain is not going to solve this.
Yeah. Now, that's one can argue that's human nature. And of course, Dr. Schenker with us here in studio. I want to thank you so much for being here. Before we touch on the 5 use cases that you brought with you, same to you. Because over the course of let's just talk about the Western world, of course, none of us trust China. One can argue that everybody's afraid that the information coming out of there is anything but correct. But what would you say about the age we live in and diseases as such, as somebody who also worked for the World Health Organization? Is it harder to control the panic in this day and age? Because the panic seems to be spreading faster than the virus.
Actually, sometimes panic is helpful, definitely, when you look at global health, which is my profession, because it drives people to more awareness and to actually take precautions. However, when the hysteria and the activities are driven by less evidence-based information and more the spread of hysteria or panic, then we are seeing also negative effects. I would challenge your statement that we cannot trust China at all about this. Actually, the World Health Organization, including others in the United States and other countries, have actually commended the way that the Chinese government had actually handled not only the situation in China, but also the sharing of the information. You see, when you have a virus...
First of all, I accept that. I think I'm speaking from an American point of view in that respect. But yes, move ahead.
Sure.
Yeah.
When you have a virus, a viral infection, definitely as coronavirus, which we call COVID-19, there needs to be one way of absorbing the information and then being able to share it. We often trust central governments to do that. My point is that we have, as a community, the blockchain community, an extraordinary opportunity to demonstrate in real life situation 2 things. One, that we are a committed community to be working with others under a situation of a global crisis. So do we as a community, whether it's from private sector or the combination of government, private sector, and civil society coming together to address this global challenge with our tools, which are the blockchain technology tools. And the second is that from my understanding there are definitely ways for the technology itself to be at the disposal of the both efforts towards prevention and definitely handling the situation. Coming to news or fake news, I think that's one concrete example, and relating to your question, that we can take a step forward and suggest that if there is a blockchain solution for addressing fake news, in other words, verifying what we are seeing, what we are hearing, then let's put it into practice immediately, and let's put it into practice not only in the countries that are already bound to address a dramatic situation, whether it's China or South Korea, Italy or Iran. Let's look towards the future progression of this pandemic, and this is a pandemic, a disease that is not an epidemic in one or two countries, but actually across several continents.
Right.
And here I think is one way for us to address the question of news, hysteria, fake news, and blockchain solutions coming in support to avert that.
To avert that, and amen to that. Danny, to you, before we look at these use cases, when it comes to Orbs, when it comes to the United States, have you guys been approached, or in this mass hysteria, or as one of the biggest, the leader of the free world is trying to deal with the pandemic crossing the border into the United States? Is there, is anybody looking to blockchain to try to interlace that into a solution?
There are existing solutions that I'm sure are part of the use cases that we're going to be discussing. But there hasn't been anything. It's like, oh, blockchain's going to solve this. No one's looking at that. I mean, they're in crisis management mode with existing resources that they don't have. I do think, however, it might be an opportunity like Y2K type opportunity, right, that it's actually the hysteria would bring about a new urgency for upgrading existing systems. And that's an opportunity to upgrade to blockchain technology, especially when you want to have, in the use case, just like we discussed, of allowing certain independence of the labs to verify these samples and to verify the results, and allowing them to report to not to a centralized authority, but in a way, open source it.
Open source the initiative. Inon, Dr. Schenker, pardon me. You have a list of 5 use cases with which blockchain can make a dent in the way the global community can start defeating the spread and negative effects of the disease. Let's go through them. Let's take a look.
Right. It's actually a call for the community and definitely the technology experts to try and bounce the challenges that the coronavirus crisis presents to us with, as Danny had said, existing solutions, and make the match. I'm not surprised, by the way, if I may interject on what we have just heard from Danny in the US, that there has not been an approach yet. I think that there is no need for us to wait for others to come to our community.
That's a good
I do believe, and that's something that we can talk about relating to INATBA. The obvious is donations. So in a crisis situation, there are countries, there are communities that could solve the issues, could address them in a fine way. But we know that monetary solutions, specifically the cryptocurrencies that are basing themselves on the blockchain technology, in the donations world are gaining a lot of traction, and I think that's another good opportunity to put this into practice. In other words, people who would like to support less developed countries, for example, that are experiencing or will experience very soon the coronavirus crisis, could do that through blockchain technologies and the cryptocurrencies, where they could also have better verification that the funds donated are really approaching and appropriately used by different organizations, whether civil society or others. Second, I think that we are looking at a situation that, there is no treatment for a viral infection with COVID-19. There is supportive treatment, but the testing is absolutely vital in order to assess and understand the situation. So could we use blockchain technologies actually to match between pockets of already increasing numbers of infected in particular cities, regions, countries, and the tests that are coming from manufacturers. So we are into, again, the labeling of tracking supply chain.
Right.
But here it's a proactive tracking in the sense of trying to match where existing manufacturers of the testing kits approved by FDA and others exist, and how to actually make sure that they arrive in a prioritized way to where they are absolutely needed and ahead of the need to address a shortage of tests. Similarly, and with the masks and the face masks, there is a bit of a controversy whether this helps or not. I tend to stay.
I'm going to stop you for a second because you're very right. Does it?
I stay on the side that would suggest that despite the fact that this is a very, very tiny virus, like most viruses, I think that the self-responsibility of an individual to actually walk with a mask, even if it's not 100% protective, and the fact that we are actually able to reduce also other viral diseases and microbial diseases in the surrounding that could contribute.
Or even a psychological effect to calm people down.
You've just touched on the right situation.
If they
so
feel safe.
I understand that in some countries this might create shortage in those masks that are absolutely necessary within medical health facilities, hospitals, clinics, etc. But I would not take that as the argument not to suggest for people to actually also use the masks.
Because the shortage is, I mean, at least as of last week, in specifically where we're sitting, was ridiculous.
Obviously, when most of the manufacturing is in China, and China supplies have been, stopped by the.
Now, and when it comes to the initiative, also the supply chain, but supporting people under, under self or institutional isolation, that I think is key, because if we are requesting part of the population, be it, let's face it, not everybody is a staff person. We're living in a gig mentality in a gig economy, and that's a tall order to put on any type of population. Isolate yourself, and how do we combat that with blockchain?
Exactly. So the isolation side has two parts to it. One is on the epidemiological side and what we call contact tracing, where blockchain could do dramatically an improved work in terms of how do you make contact tracing, which is actually if one individual is known to have been infected, how do you make sure that others in that surrounding that are not so willingly always willing so often to disclose their situation, but still that information is absolutely necessary for the health authorities. So could blockchain come at our disposal to be recording more anonymously those who are infected in the surrounding of an individual family or person, and the evidence there is towards the health authorities that are not becoming intermediators but becoming the recipients of such information to be able to act on it in a way that the health system knows how to act on it. On the second side of the same coin is I'm now 14 days at home. That means that I need to stop all my monetary transactions, all my leisure activities, my business.
That's a huge
so
problem.
here I think that blockchain could also come to our support in terms of those solutions that are existing, or actually having those entrepreneurs to look at this crisis, to get their heads together and develop maybe even new solutions. I don't see this as a charity. I see this as an enormous business opportunity also for those on the front line of innovation in blockchain to analyze the crisis with health professionals, to understand where the challenges are, and then to be able to see how their innovation could bring, even for the future. That's not the last pandemic or epidemic we are going to experience in the next decade, for the future to have other such solutions. And lastly, perhaps, is the issue of a possibility of the community to come together. And I'm very fortunate to have seen great response by INATBA, which is the, as you know, the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications, that was only erected last year. We are going to have our first ad hoc meeting tomorrow to try and see how an organization like that could get its act together to really respond more effectively to the corona crisis.
It's a very, as you said, not as a charity, but as an initiative, sadly, obviously to be used in these times of crisis, but to show that it can solve things. Danny, would you agree with that? And when it comes to Orbs, when it comes to things done in the United States, never mind people not approaching you guys or approaching the community, but the community reaching out and putting aside all kinds of, you know, how should I put it? Every community is very, you know, is kind of in a battle within itself nowadays. But what have you guys been doing over there?
So, I mean, I think it's important to remember that when we talk about, let's take supply chains, for example. So we're doing a few use cases with supply chains. The integrations and getting everyone on board, it takes a long time. I mean, just setting up the governance to how this would work and getting all the players to play along. There's the, for example, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act that was enacted in the United States, but there are a few blockchain initiatives that would track the drugs. Those things take a lot of time. I don't think it's something that, you know, we can just like pop up in the next month or so. I mean, we can show it as a proof of concept, but actually something that would work and be integrated with the big players who are now sending out tests. I don't think that's realistic, but I think it is an opportunity to showcase the potential of the technology, maybe, yes, in certain proof of concepts. That being said, what blockchain is best for, there are other use cases I would add also with insurance tech. There are going to be a lot of insurance claims.
In the States, definitely.
And a lot of insurance proofs would need to be given, and blockchain is a great use case for that. That being said, in China, because everything is controlled by the government and it's so centralized, and so would all the blockchain initiatives, then it's easier for them to onboard if they decide, yes, we're using blockchain for this. As there are about 20 apps right now that are already in production in China, working on different use cases for blockchain. One of them is accelerating the medical health records and the ability to report yourself, and certain permissions to get into certain areas and buildings based on a certain score that you got on how exposed you are. So there are experimenting with it, and as opposed to the United States and the Western world, in China, I think most of the experimentation will happen, and we'll be able to learn from it and prepare and do it the right way in the future. There is one more point I want to say about what is important about this technology is that its permissionless nature makes it dissident technology, which means that if it's for whistleblowers and for people who are suppressed and the information is suppressed, blockchain is a great way to get information out there.
And no, definitely, you know, when it comes to apropos, you know, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which have very much dominated the narrative of this pandemic, and over the course of the last month and a half. How are you taking this initiative, Dr. Schenker, forward right now?
So I want actually to touch on one thing that we are in Israel and we have just woke up from an election day. It was very interesting to have actually looked at the situation of those infected with COVID-19 coming to vote in a national election. And I think that this is an opportunity to open another potential use case when we look about and at the situation of e-voting and what blockchain could do for solving such issues when you cannot actually, or it's risky to physically come to a voting station. Now, Moscow and Zug didn't present excellent examples just in the recent past with blockchain-based voting. But that's not to say that that's the end of the story. I think actually it's the beginning of the story. And if people would look more precisely at the example of the Israeli elections yesterday, I think that this is an opportunity again to highlight the importance of trusted technology towards effective voting, where we have that opportunity as well. So to answer your question, it's been a starting point. Thank you also for alluding to that in your show. And I think that we are on a way that the community needs to find a way to act based on, number one, entrepreneurship, innovation, and business plans, But in our case now, it's actually to demonstrate if we are a community, which I believe we are,
Amen.
that we can get our act together despite differences of operation and interests and strength and size towards a global crisis, which is definitely not China-based only. And what we shall see, I unfortunately expect, is more countries, including the United States, to be testing more people and finding actually more infected. In other words, this pandemic to be with us at least for the next couple of months. With weather, and it's interesting because climate change has always been considered as a very negative.
Exactly, and the notion of summer's coming, dare I quote, I mean, I don't even know which
viruses just exist much less effectively in hot weather. So the summer and the spring ahead in parts of the world are actually good news for another assistance, which is not based on us, but on the climate, to at least counter this pandemic of the moment.
Because we always are very worried about making predictions, but I really hope a lot of people are listening to you and calming a bit down. But it definitely, the community needs to step up here, and I think just speaking to the two of you shows that we can do that. Danny, I want to thank you so much. Danny Brown-Wolf, Head of Partnership and Strategy at Orbs, coming to us from the West Coast in the United States today. Thank you so much for being with us. And Dr. Schenker, incredible information, very, very well delivered to us here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
We were BLOCKTV, and we'll be back soon.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.